Before we get into today's story, I want to ask you for one small favor. If you enjoy thoughtful stories that stay with you long after the video ends, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps us create more meaningful content. And if this story resonates with you, you'll never miss the next one. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room full of people and somehow felt completely invisible? Not because anyone was being cruel, not because you didn't belong, but because no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't shake the feeling that everyone else seemed to connect effortlessly while you stood on the outside looking in. Maybe you've replayed conversations in your mind long after they ended. Maybe you've wondered whether you talked too much or not enough. Maybe you've questioned if one awkward pause, one poorly chosen sentence, or one nervous smile changed everything. Most people know that feeling. Very few ever admit it. The strange thing about confidence is that almost everyone misunderstands it. We grow up believing confident people are fearless. We imagine they're the loudest voices in the room. The ones who always know exactly what to say, who never hesitate, never overthink, and never doubt themselves. That's the version we see in movies, on social media, and in carefully edited success stories. Reality is much quieter. The most confident people I've ever met rarely tried to be the center of attention. They didn't chase approval. They didn't force conversations or compete to tell the funniest story. Yet somehow, people naturally gravitated toward them. For years, I couldn't understand why. From the outside, my life looked perfectly normal. I had friends, work, hobbies, and plenty of reasons to smile. If someone glanced at my social media, they'd probably think everything was going well. But behind those carefully chosen photos was someone constantly asking impossible questions. Did I say something wrong? Why did the conversation suddenly feel different? Why do people seem excited to meet everyone else but never remember me? Those questions followed me everywhere. I'd lie awake late at night replaying ordinary conversations, searching for a mistake that probably never existed. I'd reread old messages, hoping to discover the exact moment warmth slowly turned into distance. There was never a clear answer. No argument. No dramatic ending. Just silence. And silence has a way of making us blame ourselves. So I tried fixing everything I could see. I bought different clothes, changed my hairstyle, practiced speaking more confidently, even rehearsed conversations before meeting people, convinced that if I could just become more interesting, everything would finally change. It never did, because I was solving the wrong problem. Looking back now, I realize I spent years trying to impress people who were simply looking for someone who made them feel understood. That realization didn't come from a best-selling book or a motivational speech. It came from meeting someone who almost disappeared into every room he entered. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He never tried to dominate conversations. Yet somehow, everyone trusted him. People relaxed around him within minutes. Complete strangers found themselves sharing stories they'd never planned to tell. Watching him felt almost confusing. He wasn't entertaining people. He wasn't performing. He was doing something much simpler and much more powerful. He was fully present. While everyone else was thinking about what to say next, he was genuinely listening. While others searched for ways to impress, he searched for ways to understand. That tiny difference changed everything. I didn't recognize it immediately. In fact, it took several conversations before I finally gathered the courage to ask him what made him so different. His answer was surprisingly simple. People spend so much time trying to become unforgettable, he said, that they forget the easiest way to be remembered. I waited for him to continue. He smiled. The person who makes others feel seen is the person they never forget. At first, those words sounded almost too simple. Surely confidence had to be more complicated than that. Surely attraction, friendship, respect, and connection couldn't all come down to something as ordinary as paying attention. But over the following weeks, I decided to test the idea. Instead of worrying about sounding impressive, I became curious. Instead of filling every silence, I let conversations breathe. Instead of trying to prove my worth, I focused on understanding the person sitting across from me. The results surprised me. People spoke longer. They laughed more naturally. They shared personal stories without being asked. Conversations that used to end after 5 minutes stretched into hours. Nothing about my appearance had changed. My voice was the same. My personality hadn't suddenly transformed. The only thing that changed was where my attention was focused. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to earn connection. I was creating space for it. That simple shift became the beginning of a journey that completely changed the way I viewed confidence, relationships, and the people around me. And what happened next taught me lessons I never expected. Lessons that would reshape every conversation I had from that day forward. But before I understood those lessons, I had to make one mistake that almost convinced me to give. I couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't because he was the funniest person in the room. It wasn't because he had the most impressive career or the loudest personality. It was because he had done something almost no one else seemed capable of doing. He made people feel important. That realization stayed with me for days. At first, I assumed I was overthinking it. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was simply looking for answers so desperately that I had convinced myself this stranger possessed some hidden secret. But life has an interesting way of bringing people back into your path when you're finally ready to learn something. About a week later, I walked into a small neighborhood cafe after work. It had become my escape whenever life felt too noisy. The soft music, the quiet conversations, and the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee always seemed to slow the world down. I ordered my usual drink and looked around for a seat. That's when I saw him. He was sitting alone near the window with a notebook beside his coffee, occasionally looking outside as people hurried past. For a brief moment, I considered pretending I hadn't noticed him. Then curiosity won. I walked over, smiled, and asked if I could join him. He looked up with the same calm expression I remembered from the dinner. Of course, he replied. There was no hesitation. No cuernis. No sense that I had interrupted him. We exchanged a few casual words before I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my mind all week. Can I ask you something a little strange? He smiled. Those are usually the best questions. I laughed. Last week, everyone seemed drawn to you. You weren't trying to impress anyone, but somehow everyone wanted to talk to you. How do you do that? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stirred his coffee slowly, as though carefully choosing his words. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Most people spend their entire lives trying to become interesting." He paused. But very few people learn how to become genuinely interested. I blinked. At first, the sentence sounded almost too simple. Surely there had to be more. A technique. A trick. Some secret body language I hadn't discovered. But he continued. When people meet someone new, he said, their attention usually isn't on the other person. It's on themselves. Am I saying the right thing? Do I sound confident? Do they like me? Am I making a good impression? He smiled gently. The funny thing is, when both people are thinking that way, nobody is actually listening. That sentence landed harder than I expected, because it described me perfectly. Every conversation I'd ever analyzed. Every awkward silence I'd rushed to fill. Every story I'd told just to seem more impressive. I had been so focused on managing other people's opinions of me that I had rarely been fully present. He wasn't criticizing me. He was simply describing human nature. We all want to be accepted. We all want to matter. The problem begins when that desire becomes the only thing we're paying attention to. He leaned back in his chair. Think about the people you enjoy being around. I started listing qualities in my mind. Funny, kind, confident, interesting. He shook his head before I could answer. I'll tell you what they all have in common. When you're with them, you don't feel judged. You don't feel like you're competing. You don't feel like you have to earn their attention. You simply feel comfortable being yourself. I had never thought about it that way. He was right. The people I remembered most weren't necessarily the most entertaining. They were the people who made me feel relaxed, safe, heard, seen. That afternoon stretched into nearly 2 hours without either of us noticing. For once, I wasn't trying to think of clever responses. I wasn't rehearsing stories in my head. I wasn't worrying about whether I sounded confident. I was simply listening. Really listening. Something changed inside me. Not dramatically. Not all at once. More like a tiny shift in perspective that quietly rearranged everything I thought I knew. Before leaving, he shared one final thought. If you walk into every conversation trying to prove your value, you'll spend your whole life performing. But if you walk in trying to understand another human being, you'll create something far more powerful. Connection. Those words stayed with me. The following week, I decided to test them. At work, instead of thinking about how to impress my coworkers, I became curious about them. I asked questions. Not the automatic questions people ask out of habit. Questions that invited real answers. What had been the highlight of their week? What hobby had they always wanted to try? What childhood memory still made them smile? Something surprising happened. People talked longer. Their faces softened. Their voices became warmer. They laughed more. And without realizing it, I found myself enjoying conversations in a way I never had before. For the first time, social interactions didn't feel like performances. They felt real. That didn't mean every conversation became magical. There were still awkward moments. There were still quiet pauses. The difference was that I no longer saw those moments as failures. Silence wasn't something that needed to be defeated. Sometimes it simply meant both people were thinking. Sometimes it meant the conversation was comfortable enough that nobody felt pressured to fill every second with words. That realization alone removed a weight I had carried for years. Gradually, people began responding differently to me. Friends stayed longer after gatherings. Co-workers opened up about personal struggles. Even strangers occasionally shared stories I never expected to hear. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Then I realized something much deeper. People weren't responding to a new personality. They were responding to my real one. For years, I had hidden behind carefully rehearsed versions of myself. Now those walls were disappearing. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was becoming someone honest. And honesty has a quiet power that performance can never imitate. Still, there was one lesson I hadn't learned yet. Listening could open the door to connection. But true confidence required something even harder. It required letting go of